Thank you all for joining us this evening. I hope that the attendance will rise as we go on this evening. Good evening, and thank you for attending. Welcome to our second book talk in the Doing the Work series entitled Fighting Time, Trauma, Justice, and Healing, with co-authors of the book, renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Amy Banks, an exoneree and decorated boxer and boxing trainer, Mr. Isaac Knapper. Their book, Fighting Time, officially debuts tomorrow. My name is Kenitra Brown, and I am the Director of Engagement at the Decent Criminal Justice Reform Center, housed here at SMU Dedman School of Law. The Decent Center, along with our co-host, the SMU Dedman School of Law Office of Diversity and Inclusion, headed by by Dean Erica Fidel. We're so excited to host this conversation. The Doing the Work series is a curated series of presentations designed to help provide thoughtful and crucial context around the national conversations of racial, social, and criminal justice. The center brings a stats and stories approach to criminal justice reform. We use stats to emphasize the stories of real lived experiences of justice-involved people to make compelling cases for criminal justice reform. We tell these stories through research, education, and advocacy under the head of our director, Professor Pamela Metzger. We do focused research into systems. Our engagement and programming seeks to make our work and research visible and accessible. While our primary areas of research concern prosecutorial discretion, public defense, and small tribal and rural criminal justice systems, our engagement agenda recognizes that we don't and can't do our work in a vacuum. So we seek to provide platforms contextualizing our work within broader criminal justice, legal, and social and racial justice frameworks. It is then fitting that our second book talk in this series lays bare the enormity of our criminal legal system and the ways it affects us all. Before I formally introduce our speakers, I'd like to remind everyone that we're recording this webinar presentation, but we welcome audience engagement. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions of the authors or about the conversation, and please feel free to engage with each other in the chat section. Please be respectful, thoughtful, and mindful of each other, the university, and our guest speakers. I'd like to formally introduce our speakers. Dr. Amy Banks is an author of 4 books and a founding scholar at the International Center for Growth and Connection, and a senior scholar at the Wellesley Centers for Women. She is the first person to bring relational cultural theory together with neuroscience and is the foremost expert in the combined field. She's spoken throughout the country on the neurobiology of relationship and has an ongoing passion to spread the message that we are hardwired for connection. She's authored numerous articles and book chapters on relational cultural theory, the neurobiology of trauma, and the neurobiology of relationship. She has previous experiences helping women deal with the impacts of abuse and violence and with treating asylum seekers and victims of crime. But Fighting Time is her first attempt at writing about the personal and familial trauma of her father's murder, a tragedy amplified by the wrongful conviction of co-author and exoneree, Mr. Isaac Knapper, when he was just 17 years old. Isaac Knapper is currently the head trainer of the Crescent City Boxing Gym in New Orleans, Louisiana. He has a deep passion to help coach and train young kids and young adults to avoid the psychological beatings and suffering that he experienced in Orleans Parish Prison, Angola, and the Louisiana Department of Corrections. Boxing has been at the center of Isaac's life. He was a Golden Gloves champion in Louisiana at the age of 15. And at the age of 16, when he was arrested and tried as an adult and wrongly convicted of the murder of Dr. Ronald Banks, he was sentenced to life in prison at Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola. While there, he was the Louisiana Department of Corrections boxing title, or he held the title for 11 years. And after leaving Angola and after his exoneration in 1991, he restarted his amateur boxing career, just missing by one bout a spot on the USA team that competed in the Barcelona Olympics. From 1992 until 1998, he boxed professionally, traveling throughout the country and the world. Although exonerated and uncompensated after 13 years in Angola, a broken hand, a growing family, and a lack of other marketable skills led to Isaac's reincarceration in 1999 for trafficking drugs. He was sentenced to another 20 years in federal prison. He served 17 years of that sentence and was released in the spring of 2015. Isaac estimates that roughly 7 of the 30 years that he spent incarcerated was served in solitary confinement. Welcome, Amy and Isaac. Let's get right to it. We have a special guest joining us today. We have Isaac's former attorney and current judge, Lori Wright, who will introduce the story of Isaac Knapper and Dr. Amy Banks, and then we'll join Dr. Banks and Isaac in conversation. Please welcome Judge Lori Wright.
Hey, can you see me? Because I can't see anybody. Good deal. So, is there some way that I could get everybody's video on here? It doesn't look like it. All right, so I'm talking in the blind. I was Isaac Knapper's lawyer after I had been a prosecutor in New Orleans in Harry Connick's office. I left Harry Connick's office, went to work with an insurance defense firm. That insurance defense firm put me with a lawyer that said, you know, I've got this lovely lady named Clara Lee that is a client, and she needs a lawyer to represent her son. The lawyer that they ended up with was me. And this is a beautiful story to explain how, as a brand new young lawyer, you can actually meet someone that will eventually still be in your life 35 years later, and you're talking about a book that they have written. This is one of the most heartwarming stories, and this Isaac has been the client of my life. The judge that Isaac was convicted in was Judge Frank Shea, and Isaac needed a lawyer because his inmate counsel had gotten him a hearing. All right, I'm seeing nothing. Is it, what has happened to my computer? All right, I'm sorry, y'all. I'm trying to just get anything on anybody. All right. Okay. Can Nancy come up here and see if she can take a look at this? There, at least I got something. Okay. I'm back. So they needed a lawyer that would go in front of the judge that could help Isaac Knapper for his hearing that had been granted by the Louisiana Supreme Court. This was a hearing involving whether Isaac's case had been a wrongful conviction with the prosecutor withholding Brady material or exculpatory material. So this set us out on a very long and storied career. Look, come see what I got. This is all I got. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just keep going.
All right. Now I didn't have anything. Now I'm here. All right. I'm back. So we handled the case for Isaac. This was my very first young man I ever went to see in prison as my very first criminal defense client. And Isaac was like meeting a boy that had been raised by wolves because he had already been incarcerated by about 15 years. We proceeded to have a hearing. We took a long road to finally get his conviction reversed at the Louisiana Supreme Court. We then filed lawsuits for Isaac to get money for his wrongful incarceration. And Isaac's case was the case that now has given all prosecutors in Louisiana absolute immunity from malicious prosecution. Isaac at that point then realized he had to do something else in life. So I became his boxing manager. My husband became his promoter. We bought a boxing gym to take Isaac through his amateur career and then through his professional career. And then ultimately, Isaac ended up back in difficulties because he did not have the resources when he returned home from prison. And I learned at that point that reentry from jail requires more than just a lawyer that cares about you or family members that care about you. And as a result of Isaac being incarcerated and then coming home, and we tried to make life better for him, but it was almost impossible. He was so damaged from his time in jail that I ultimately started a reentry program at court because of my interactions with Isaac and the fact that we ultimately lost Isaac back to prison. So when Isaac finally comes out of prison 18 years later, we have, I then get an email from Dr. Amy Banks. And I ultimately put Amy Banks and Dr. Amy Banks and Isaac together, and they wrote this book. And so I'm happy to introduce Isaac and Amy, and I want them to tell you about their story. This is their story.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Lori. And, to add a few details, here I am, Amy Banks, Dr. Amy Banks, and my good friend, Isaac Knapper. Really happy to be here. A couple of things that I would add from the other side is that from our part of the story, my family's part of the story, I grew up in Bangor, Maine, so we couldn't be further apart in terms of worlds, literally kind of north and south. And in Bangor, Maine, Maine continues to be the whitest state in the country. I think it's about 95%. And the reason that plays out is that, as far as my family, my father had gone to New Orleans in 1979 to go to a history conference at the Hyatt Regency Hotel. And we didn't think much of it. The day that he left, he had dinner in the French Quarter, came back to his hotel, and just right outside the Hyatt Regency, he and his colleague were held up and murdered by 2 or 3 men described at the time as Black men. And immediately, almost immediately, once this happened, what we started getting from the prosecution, from anything in Louisiana, was kind of information about, once they arrested Isaac, and that's a long story, but once they arrested Isaac and this other guy, Leroy Williams, they started a steady stream of telling us how sure they were that this was Isaac Knapper, that he was the right guy, that he was a kid that had been in a lot of trouble. They were looking to try to get him. And essentially, my family, took it hook, line, and sinker. We didn't know any different. Like I often say, it's, the idea that race wasn't an issue. It was an issue because there weren't people of color growing up. So we never had to grapple with the idea of, many of the things that I know Isaac, his family, and friends and everybody were dealing with just on a very regular basis, right? So our family thought, yep, yeah, okay, that's it. And Isaac was convicted in a one-day trial, and we'll go into some of the details of it. But the point is that it's important to sort of think about the context within which some of these, I want to say, dysfunctional and really horrendous systems operate in the criminal justice system. Do you want to throw a couple of
Yes.
thoughts in?
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Lori.
Yeah.
Yes, I at that time, I was home when the police come to my mother's house to arrest me for murder that I knew nothing of. They took me down. They started interrogating me, asking me, why did I do it? You did it. I said, did what? You committed that murder. You killed. And some of them were saying that's their friend. You killed my friend. And I didn't know what they was talking about. And it had me so confused. But the thing is that Leroy Williams pointed the finger at me and claimed that I committed the murder. And I never could figure out all the way up to this day. And it's been what, 37, 40 years?
42.
42 years. And it's still haven't left my mind. I'm still confused. I have some people that ask me what happened, and it's just a question that I can't answer because I don't know what happened. All I knew is that I was arrested and being interrogated for a crime I had no knowledge of. And it was so terrible because they went far as physically, not just mentally abusing me, but physically abusing me. I was put in the hospital for about 4 to 6 weeks because they had broke my ribs, had to take blood clots out of my body and cut me on both sides of my chest. But anyway, some of the things that they did, it still, it has me kind of messed up psychologically because I've never actually healed from these things that they was doing. I still have feelings in my chest where they had to cut me at. And as long as that been, I can still feel like I got needles when I touch it, you know, and these things, and especially as far as the physical part, yes, I deal with it, but the mental, that's where it really stuck at in my head, you know, and I've still never really healed from some of the things that they did to me and how they scandalized my name. They was telling Dr. Amy and her family that I was a terrible juvenile, and I had a terrible juvenile record, and I did this and did that, and they just couldn't get me, and now they got me. And so things like that, you know, so I'm still kind of trying to establish myself psychologically from the abuse that I experienced.
And just to also add to the trajectory of the story. So Isaac, you were exonerated, you were released in 1992, right? And then went on to have your, was it 92?
Well, it was 92, I was exonerated, but I was released in 91,
Okay.
at the end of 91.
91, and then fully exonerated in 92.
Yes.
And, you know, part of this story, and, you know, people often will be like, what, you know, why are you getting together? We didn't meet each other in 2015. But one of the things that happened, you know, in terms of the trajectory of the story is that when Isaac was exonerated, nobody told our family. So we, you know, we had been fairly, you know, we were trying to move on with our lives, having had a, you know, my father murdered, you know, and that in and of itself wasn't an easy thing to do. But then what happened was, so Isaac was released and my family didn't know. So now our whatever justice we thought we had gotten, right, was tossed out. It was an open murder case, but nobody told us. So we didn't have any idea that this even happened until about 2003, when my sister Nancy's husband actually Googled Isaac Knapper, and all of this information came up about Isaac's exoneration, his release, his boxing career. And of course, you know, my brother-in-law, Gary, was like, oh my God, like, holy shit, what am I going to do with this? Right. And we tried to actually get the case open. My sister Nancy tried to get the case open, but there really wasn't a lot of bandwidth. And, you know, come to find out, I mean, at that time, I'm not sure we even knew how horrendous the Harry Connick Sr. DA system was in New Orleans. Like, this is sadly, Isaac's story was one of many people that had been railroaded just to get a conviction. So we did, and even once we knew, we also, as you know, the family of the victims, you know, really didn't get any help in trying to figure out how are we going to try to manage this? Could we open up the case? Or anything. And then we finally just ended up dropping it until 2015. And, you know, we can get into the story, maybe Kenitra, and talk more about it. But for me, what was happening, I was by then a psychiatrist and very involved in trauma work. And my kids were getting to be the age that Isaac and I were when all of this happened. And it was just roiling in me. And that was when I made the decision to reach out to try to find Lori White, not knowing where to start. And, you know, and this is where we are now. And I imagine part of what we'll share with everyone. Yeah.
Thank you both for sharing at least the broader view of what's happening here. To contextualize the rest of the story for the audience, Dr. Amy Banks' father was a professor at University of Maine, a history professor, Dr. Ronald Banks, at University of Maine, when he was in New Orleans, when he came to New Orleans for a conference and was mugged, shot, and killed outside of his hotel, the Hyatt Regency Hotel, in 1979. Isaac and Dr. Banks were both teenagers, 16 and 17 at that time. So this event has, obviously, Isaac is falsely arrested, accused, and convicted of this murder. And during the investigation phase, Isaac is beaten through his interrogations, like you mentioned, spent time in the hospital. He is forced into solitary confinement, and the entire time maintained his innocence. He also, during trial, maintained his innocence. but he's tried as an adult and put into adult facilities throughout this ordeal. At the time, Amy's getting ready to graduate. She's about to get ready to play in her on her all-star basketball team. And this happens the weekend preceding that game. So it's an impressionable time for both of them. As you read the book, if it can be split into themes, it turns into basically the subtitle for this event: Trauma, Justice, and Healing. A good portion of this book, of telling of the story, addresses the trauma that both Dr. Banks and Isaac dealt with at the start of this issue, and as Isaac mentioned, that they still deal with even now. So I think it's important to kind of take advantage of both Isaac's experience and Amy's experience and her profession. And I want to spend at least the top half of this discussion discussing trauma, what it is, how we use it, and how it's often weaponized against any type of reform in the system. And to clarify what I mean by that, there's this, oftentimes victims' trauma is used as a way to justify deplorable treatment, conditions of institutions in our criminal legal systems. It's used to justify deplorable treatment of other human beings. I guess I want to ask you both, or especially Dr. Banks, what is trauma? And do you think we truly understand how it manifests itself in our lives, our work, and in the criminal justice systems for the sake of public safety and victims?
Yeah. Let me start with that. So first of all, I mean, I think it's interesting to even think about how would one define trauma. One of my mentors, Judy Herman, once described it as an event that is basically too hard to grasp in your mind, that you literally, your mind and body cannot integrate it, right? Is something that is that traumatic. And so it's not only just a psychological thing, but it's also a physiological event that happens. And certainly I would say that for both of us, there's been massive trauma. In some ways, I feel like my trauma and my family's trauma around this was somewhat circumscribed, I mean, or compartmentalized. You know, one of the things that has been just striking to me about meeting Isaac, all of the conversations we have had through the years is, you know, my family has been, you know, mourning the death and the murder of my father for, 42 years. And, very early on, as I'm talking to Isaac, I learned, like, that's a tip of the iceberg. He has had more people in his life murdered, killed, the police brutality, the criminal justice system. So it's almost, you can't even compare them at that point, right? They're both traumas, and, they're both creating actually just massive havoc in, I think, anybody's, mind and bodies. But, there's a particular sadism, there's a particular violence that happens, I think, within the criminal justice system. When you say, like this idea that the victim, right, the victim's family, that we can't reform the system because of it. One of the things that I want to say loudly and clearly is that the fact that Isaac Knapper got pulled into my family's tragedy made our tragedy so much worse, right? I think I recently said to somebody, the only thing that could make the murder of your father worse is when you have then wrongly convicted somebody and ruined their lives or dramatically shifted their lives in order to try to make some sense of this. It was horrendous. And so that has now become even a whole other layer of trauma, and I'm not co-opting your trauma, but that severely has complicated what happened in our family. So basically, I'm saying I don't buy that argument, and I can't imagine anybody that has been victimized or has had a family member killed or raped or what have you, that wouldn't feel the same way, right? That bringing somebody else into the story, and I'm now in the position of being able to meet, Isaac's family, all these friends of his, the ripple effects of trauma, right? Yes, it happened in my family, and we had ripples and ripples and ripples of trauma within our community. The same thing was going on in Isaac's, but it was based on nothing other than an abuse of the system.
So your trauma, both of your trauma is obvious, right? There's a way to obviously feel empathy for both of you in this conversation. But the other part of that conversation is, or even how the prosecutor continued to characterize Isaac even after his exoneration, is that there are people who do commit crimes, or there were teenagers, or there were people who mugged your father and killed him.
Mhm.
How do you hold space for in this system of, or hold your position on advocacy and change for people who are guilty of heinous activities or guilty of crimes against the public? How do you hold space for them in this system? And even around, or do you feel that we should hold space for
Yeah,
people like that in the system?
and again, I have to say, I have learned a lot about this from Isaac, and when, one of the things that really moved me is his honest appraisal of going to prison that second time and saying, okay, I did this, right? I will do the time. And we've chatted about other guys that feel the same way, but there's doing time and there's going to prison and being sadistically abused, right? You can do time without time being what it is these days in prison, right? So I'm not saying we have to, stop any kind of penalties or what have you, but I think, what is embedded in the whole criminal justice system is really sick, and it's inhumane. And there's this kind of, I think, idea that somehow the victim's family is going to feel better if the person in prison is mistreated, right? That makes no sense to me. So, and, another thing that is always asked of me, what about justice now? What about the people that did it? And, I kind of want to say it's been 42 years. I'm not so focused on that anymore. I'm not sure there would be anything that kind of evened the playing field. I don't think it ever did. It ever would have, right?
Isaac, so a portion of this book talks about, and a portion of the summary also talks about how boxing saved your life while you were in Angola. It gave you something to do. But other than this physical activity, you also say you still are dealing with the trauma of your first incarceration, of solitary confinement, of the actual conditions of your interrogation. If you could build the system that would have helped you in your ordeal, what would it have looked like? What would it look like? What would justice look like? Or what would rehabilitation, or what would time look like for you and people who you served time with in Angola and other places? What would that look like?
First of all, that justice, when we speak about justice, is supposed to be blind, right? But the justice that we look at, it has the scarf around the eye, but it's peeping out of one eye, and it shouldn't be that way. It's obvious that with the systemic racism, that they have picks and choose. Now I don't try and make things look good for people that's in prison that's guilty. But you have guys have to understand that you meet some of the best people in prison now, and they all are not innocent. They have a lot of people in prison that have committed these crimes, and they would admit to it. They'll tell you, yeah, I committed that crime and it was terrible, but I'm not that person no more. So and as far as the rehabilitation, we know the system is not designed to rehabilitate you. It's designed to have you come right back. And that's the reason why you have so many guys that gets out of prison, don't have housing, they put you out and just tell you, nah, it's on you. And these guys been gone 20, 30 years. They don't have no way, of trying to survive in the free world and be a productive citizen. So they go back and they try. Everybody, even a dog, gonna try and find something to eat. So of course, yes, they will fall back into crime. Some of them, but back again, it does not mean that just because these people is incarcerated in bondage does not mean that they're not a good person. All right. And I'd have met many of them in prison. Many of them worked out with many of them. And I learned, I asked, you know, oh man, you that crime I read about, you did that? Yes, I did it. Am I sorry? Yes, I'm sorry I did it. And I wish I can change things. And if I know now what I know then, it wouldn't have never happened, you know. But these prisoners that I'm speaking about, it's the system. I'm so happy that Lori became a part of this, because now she got guys that they would take her class in Angola, the same penitentiary that I served all that time in. She have a class there, and she's trying to help everybody. That's just her. She's trying to help everybody. And even though she's a judge, she is more respected than anybody I've ever met in my entire life. And all the inmates love her. They love her because she's fair. She's fair. She does her job. And I, speaking about Laura, it's just go on and on and on with me. So you have to cut me off. You know? Yeah, because you know she's my hero, Shiro, and I love her to death. But anyway, she started this program in Angola to where if you complete her class, you know, you would be compensated as far as with your time concerned. You know, you wouldn't have to do everything, but you'd have to complete her class. And that's unheard of. She was the first one come through there with that, you know, and that's why all the inmates love her, because they know she's trying to help. She's trying to help. If you're wrong, she's gonna let you know you're wrong. If you're right, she's gonna let you know you're right. You know, she's just straight down to earth, you know. And so like I said, I don't want to get off the subject, but like I said, everybody, just because they're doing time in prison don't mean they're a bad person. Now we have some that's bad, and they'll let you know they're not going to change. But we have a lot of them that'll let you know, yes, I committed that crime, but I'm a different person. And a lot of them, trust me, a lot of them is a different person because of Judge Lurie. Once these people find out that they have somebody that really care, you know, they'll show their appreciation.
Well, speaking of Judge White, since she's here, I think I'm going to take advantage of the fact that she is here and actually drive this next part when we start talking about the justice part to her, because she's here. The legal aftermath of the Banks' case, of Isaac's and Dr. Banks' case, is it's all over the legal system, right? You get a change on the civil side. You get a change in hotel security protocols after the civil suit from Dr. Banks' family. You unintentionally, in a bad way, unintentionally, prosecutors get civil immunity from malicious prosecution or from ethical violations. But you also, and you mentioned this earlier, you're also one of the first to get actual charge accepted against a prosecutor for unethical behavior or malicious prosecution. So a lot comes out of that. You also mentioned that in your courtroom, you've made it a point to put up a reentry program. But on the front end, as a former attorney and now a judge, a lot of people are looking at reform from the front end. What can we do before a person gets involved in the carceral system? What can judges do? What can prosecutors do? What can defense attorneys do? That's one question. And then we'll get to what other people can do as they advocate in the system. But I'd kind of like to ask you, what other things, you said that this one case, because Isaac, your first criminal client, completely changed your view about ethics and integrity in the system. What else in your career have you advocated for, are you pushing for? And what roles can practitioners play to push certain reforms, especially on the front end of situations of the criminal justice system, to avoid stories like Isaac's and Amy's?
You know, what a great question. When I was a prosecutor, before I was a criminal defense lawyer, I had been a prosecutor in Harry Connick's office. So when I was contacted to handle Isaac's case, the civil lawyer that asked me to talk to his mother said, this is an allegation that a prosecutor cheated. And I said, oh, I'll take a look at that. I'll be glad to handle it, because I can't believe a prosecutor would cheat. Well, little did I know, when I looked at the Brady material in this case, which was a 31-page police report that had not been turned over to Isaac's trial lawyers. And remember, Isaac was tried for a death penalty. This was a first-degree murder in the 70s, and they were seeking the death penalty against him. Thank goodness the jury was not able to, they found him guilty of first-degree murder, but then they did not come back with a death penalty. So his lawyers were not slacks. They were not bad lawyers. They were lawyers with experience, and they were lawyers that did the best they could, but they had a prosecutor that withheld evidence that should have been turned over. But I think what's interesting about his case, because it's had so many firsts, when he went to trial in Louisiana, a police report was not automatically turned over to the defense. But based on Brady material and exculpatory material and favorable information, it should have been turned over. But of course, the prosecutor, when we went back and looked at this case, the prosecutor didn't answer the questions that he would turn over that information. And then it became an issue of whether he turned it over. So I was the first person to learn that lawyers cheat. And I found out that a prosecutor that predated me had cheated. So now I'm all in. I went from prosecutor to defense lawyer overnight with one case. So now I know that a prosecutor will cheat. So then I'm like, this can't be right. So I file a lawsuit so that we can get money damages. Ultimately, we lose all the way at the Louisiana Supreme Court. And thanks to me and Isaac, they now have absolute immunity. But I said, there has to be more. So I filed a attorney disciplinary. It went to trial 15 years later. I testified. They ultimately found that, nope, we can't really find that he should be held responsible. But the point was, they accepted an attorney disciplinary complaint, and now they accept those against lawyers in this state. Additionally, the law has changed since Isaac's case so that people can get financially remunerated for time that they were in prison. Again, Isaac didn't get that. But we didn't stop there, because as I told you all, here's Isaac with all these letdowns from, we didn't make it to the Olympic trials, but we couldn't keep him out. Poor Isaac. I remember the day he was in my office, and I said, well, Isaac, what do you want to do? Because doesn't look like boxing. We're going to make enough money with boxing for you. You didn't go to the Olympics. What do you want to do? Isaac looked around and he said, well, I'll do what you do. And I said, oh, Isaac, God bless you. You got to get your GED. Then you got to go to college. Then you got to go to law school. But everything we put Isaac in, and that's something that I just want to express, because I'm a fan of Isaac's the same. He was always so gentle and so unharmed and peaceful that I was always so stunned, because I would have been so angry and so mean and so unforgiving that all this had happened to me. And Isaac was never that way. He was always so appreciative. So when I moved on in a career as a defense lawyer and realized that people in returning to the community don't have a shot. And I'm talking about people returning to a community that may have been guilty of a crime, did their time, and they come home. Well, they can't get a job because they have a criminal history or a criminal, conviction, especially if it might even be a violent crime, that nobody wants to hire them. So as a lawyer, I started hiring people in my law firm that had been to prison. So I hired people in the office that had previously been to prison. And believe me, I had my problems, because some of them would steal from me, and they'd have other problems, but I gave them a chance. And then I realized when I became a judge that the only way to make things work was for me to use the power and position of my job to start a reentry program. And I actually worked with the warden out at Angola State Penitentiary, who was Warden Kane, and myself and another judge started a reentry program in Louisiana that's now all over the state for judges that wish to do it. And we house it, because I was so familiar with Isaac, I used him as the example to do the whole program. Isaac needed things before he got home. So I wanted my program to be in the prison. So I wanted him to get a GED while he's in prison. And now I'm using life sentenced inmates at Angola, where there's still a whole bunch of Isaac's old friends. I use them as the mentors, and they work with these young kids that we put in prison to make sure they get their GED. We make sure that they get their medical treatment. We make sure that they are learning how to perform when they get a job, how to go to work, because these are kids that have never really had a job. They've never had a job, or they've not had a good job. And so we're trying to give them training and skills, because I believe that giving an individual a job will stop the criminal violence, or will stop the criminal cycle with many people, if you can get them treatment for either their mental problem or their psychiatric problems or their addiction. So Isaac led to all of that. So he's my hero.
So we can hear from the three of you how this changed the trajectory of your careers, of the way you thought about things. For Judge White, it was easy, well, not easy, but it was clear as an attorney ways that you can be involved. But both Amy and Isaac both hold themselves out to be advocates, to keep people out of the prison system, and to be social justice advocates. And Frank, they are the public, they are lay people now. So for Isaac and Amy, can you guys talk about, I guess I preface it more with saying that, as we start to understand the enormity of the system, how big it gets, how large it is, how it can ensnare families and people and communities. If you're not an attorney, if you're not a judge, if you're not the family member of someone involved, it can feel overwhelming. You can feel helpless to do anything. You can feel like you didn't do anything. And yet, for example, one of Isaac's biggest fighters on his side was his mom. With 9 other kids, his mom, and a single parent, his mom was his biggest advocate for opening up, and we'll talk about this for the audience, for finding the Dillman report, the report that ultimately goes the longest way at getting Isaac exonerated. She's crucial in getting that report discovered and turned over. She's crucial in kind of your strength and moving through your sentences. And Amy, your work as a psychiatrist becomes crucial for you as part of your social justice advocacy. So you guys both kind of talk about how lay people, or the average person, or people who aren't practitioners, criminal justice practitioners, how they can be involved in moving this work forward, or how you've been involved in moving the needle on reform, or even with your own cases, just how this is, or in your lives, how this has played out for you both. You're muted. Sorry, you're muted. Yeah.
Unmute. There you go. That's good. Yeah. Yeah, this really has changed the trajectory of my life in a lot of ways. I think at this point in my life, there isn't a whole lot that is as important personally for me and professionally for me, quite frankly, in trying to understand the system. And you're absolutely right. It is vast. And I think most people are kind of, once you start, maybe you hear one story and they're like stunned. And then, you hear another. And I think there's the stories are so horrendous, right? That I think people literally try to psychologically deal with it by imagining it's just this person, or just this person, or this is a fluke case, rather than really appreciating the breadth of the problem that this is, right? For me, telling our story is, I think, one of the biggest ways that we can, from the positions that we're in, contribute to the conversation. I really hope that what the book does and what we're doing in these conversations gets everybody talking. And a fine example was last night, Nancy and I, my sister Nancy, who of course has been, by my side through this whole thing, we're flying down here, and we ended up striking up a conversation with a lawyer that was sitting beside me, and then a flight attendant who had just heard a story about wrongful conviction. And, you could see she was moved to tears, this woman, about the story she had heard. you know, with this, just what you're saying, which is overwhelmed, what can I do? And what we keep saying is keep talking about the stories, right? Share the stories. Over and over again. There are concrete things, right, that lay people can do. You can contribute to various innocence projects. If you're a lawyer, you can do some pro bono work because it's needed everywhere to try to help people that are still unjustly convicted, right? But I do think getting people to talk about it and really talk about the brutality that exists in this system, right? And you know, just as Lori created this program with someone else, and it completely turns the equation on its head, right? Which is all of a sudden you take these guys who are in Angola, life in prison without parole, deemed throwaway, essentially, right? Because why would you rehab anybody? Why would you, and not treating them as human beings? And just the simple act of, being able to get some training, being able to get some hope, being able to get some education about a whole host of things, whether it's drugs and alcohol, getting treatment, that sort of thing. I mean, we're really talking about people here. And I think that's what gets missed, is these are people. And as long as, and the whole system is built, in this divisive us versus them, once you're in jail, you're done. So I think the biggest thing people can do is really share their stories and see locally, is there something going on in your community, and how can you get involved? So,
Yeah,
Isaac,
yes, yeah, and off of what Amy said, and also with Judge Lurk. Could you hear me?
yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think if, like Amy said, if we need people to talk about it, we need people to understand this book, buy this book, read this book, and see what's going on. And once we get people to talking about it, because it is a touchy situation with some people, they don't like to talk about things like this here. And some people don't mind talking about it, but I think that's where it starts at. When they start talking about it, then things starts to happen. With Lori, she started a program in Angola, all right, and everybody started talking about it. You hear guys talk about it right now. If you take that class, that Judge Lori have going on, you would have a better chance of getting your time cut, getting out. Then you have a trade under your belt. You have something you can do. Lori help people get jobs all the time. Just like she said, she hired ex-offenders to give them a chance, and some bad, some good, but she still give them a chance, and it's on you if you take that chance and take advantage of it, but some guys, they would get out and do the right thing. Some people won't. And my thing is, I think people need to try and understand an ex-offender, somebody that been in bondage, see, because we lived it. Some people read about it, like Amy, Nancy, they read about these things that we experienced, that we've been through, that we lived, so of course, if they talk to some of us and they try to get involved in some of these programs, like I'm a part of a peer support group where there's a bunch of ex-offenders. It's like a re-entry, and we all come together. We come together and we talk about these things. We talk about what we can do to be productive, what we can do to contribute, what we can do to help young people from making a mistake that we made. And so that's part of our program. And that's what we do to give back and try and help. But at the same time, we need help too. We need somebody to listen to us, try to help us. And that's why I love Amy, that she done got involved with the peer support group and she tries to help in any way she could. And so she starting to learn to understand ex-offender and what we've been through as a people. We human beings, we not no animal, just because what happened to us, yeah, we was destroyed psychologically, but we still human beings that some of us need help, more help than others. But most of the part, we just about all of us need some kind of help, you know, that been in bondage like that.
Yeah. The other thing I want to say, and I do see Lori White has her hand up, so I'm very curious about what Lori has to say. But the other thing I want to be very clear about as well in this is though you know, people of all races can be impacted by wrongful conviction, this is overwhelmingly an issue for Black men, right? And people of color. And, you know, and for every white person who may be listening, I want to be very clear. It is our job. We've created these 6 systems. The dominant culture has created these 6 systems, and it is up to us to be the, you know, I'm not saying leading, doing it on our own. I mean, we need to know all of us, right? We need your wisdom, you need the wisdom of all these guys, but we've got to own that and not turn away from it, right? I get that any individual white person may not have created the system, but we're all participating in it and we're all benefiting from it. And I think that's often not a message that, you know, some subgroups of white people want to hear, but the system is extraordinarily biased and the statistics around that are just terrifying. And so, you know, you know, where I'm in my neck of the woods in, you know, Lexington, Massachusetts right now, you know, I'm not hearing about it, but I come down here and I'm meeting all Isaac's friends. Everybody's got a story,
Yeah.
you know, a brother, an uncle, whatever. And usually a handful of them, you know, and we need to take this on as a society. So, you know, yes, we're talking about prison reform, but we're also talking about systemic racism in, you know, in all of the institutions that exist. Yeah.
I had my
Before I
hand up.
tap-
Can I add something?
I am coming right to you, Lori, on that one. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and let you cover what you covered in the comments and then come back to you. Go ahead.
You know, nobody wants to do jury duty, really. Some of you might, but most people don't. If we had a wider array of the community that would do jury duty, jury verdicts would be different. And, you know, everybody wants me as a judge to excuse them from jury duty. And it's the one thing I say no about. You need to be on a jury when you're called. It's really, is that you, Pam Metzger? How are you? We're old friends. Kisses to you, my friend. She's fighting a good fight in another state. And another thing that Pam Metzger would appreciate, I think TVs need to be in the courtrooms. I think if we have reality TV and we're looking at all this other stupid stuff, then they need to see the seriousness of what's going on. I think if people see bad judges, they will get rid of and unelect those bad judges. I think if they see bad lawyers and bad prosecutors and they see somebody cheating and a judge call them down in a courtroom, because that's what I do when I catch them, then they're going to remove the prosecutors and people will be unelected. And I think that that's how we have community involvement. It's not just buy this book and read it. It's get yourself involved by knowing what's going on in your community. What's that prosecutor like? Who are the judges? Don't just call a lawyer, you know, and say, which person should I elect? Know your elected officials. So that's mine.
I'll also follow up here. One of the things I wanted to mention, following up on Amy's comment and following up on Judge White's comment, is that that women are growing. The number of women that are joining the incarcerated population in this country is growing at 2 times the rate of men. So right. The other reason why it's incredibly important to be involved in what's happening is that we already know the men who are being incarcerated are fathers, brothers, sons, cousins, community members, but we're also now incarcerating women at excessive rates. And so we're talking about mothers, sisters, daughters, and increasingly it's just a thing. Women are the backbones of most communities. They hold these communities together. And as those carceral numbers increase, we further, undermine the growth in communities of color, especially. So I definitely wanted to bring that up in this conversation. If bias is involved in the system, imagine how much more bias you have when you have women and women of color in the system. As we move forward. Before we move to the next question, know we're on camera, but Pam, do you have, since you're joining in, do you want to follow up with anything, or our director just joined? I'm going to take that as a no. All right, we're going to move to our next portion of the program before we get to the Q&A, the healing portion. And I want to start this portion with an excerpt from the book. I will ask our authors to read a portion of the book, or a portion of the book that they want to read in a bit. But to me, this portion stood out. It's a good way of thinking about why they wrote this book together, what this book is getting at, and kind of this next portion of the conversation and what we want to get in the Q&A. Near the end of the book, Dr. Banks writes, as humans, we are capable of unimaginable violence and deep kindnesses, as well as a capacity to feel one another. And in that feeling, we are enlarged and improved, even in the deepest pain. In feeling another person, we are invited to become whole. This is what she writes right before she meets Isaac. It's this, she talks about this compelling feeling to want to meet Isaac ever since she saw him in the newspaper clipping as the person who was arrested for her father's murder. And this next portion of the program kind of want us to touch on this journey that you and Isaac have been on, and by extension, Judge White, towards this connectedness for both of you, or feeling connected, and on what this has meant for you in this journey, and what this can mean for those of us who are in this space doing this work.
Kenitra, I have to say, so there was some background noise as you were saying that. So can you repeat? I don't know what it was. It was like some, it sounded like some paper shuffling. Could you just repeat the question? I got the essence of what you're saying in the quote, but could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I just would like you guys to speak about like the importance of that human connection, or, you know, how that works for those of us who are doing work in this space, or who want to do work in this space, and why that human connectedness is important to keep in mind, or that healing journey that you guys have been on.
That's a hard one to put words to, I have to say. You know, I know when I first reached out to Isaac, you know, I've had people ask me kind of in the last 6 months or so, like, what were you looking for, right? Like, what were you hoping for? And the truth is, I wasn't really sure. As you said, Kenitra, I was always drawn to him. I remember seeing literally that day that, or a few days after you were arrested, and seeing his picture in the newspaper with John Dillman, you know, with his hands cuffed behind his back, and just staring at it for the longest time. Some of that may have been shock, you know, trying to picture this guy killing my father, you know. So there was some of that, but it's always been curious to me, because I did not have the same curiosity about the other guy that was arrested, Leroy Williams. And I really don't know why that was. But, you know, I have always been drawn to Isaac. There were times when I was even in my 20s that I thought, I wonder if I'll ever meet Isaac Knapper. You know, and again, I couldn't even tell you where this was coming from. As I became a psychiatrist and increasingly gotten involved in the work of trying to change society as a whole, from one that is so preoccupied with being, you know, socialization being all about standing on your own 2 feet, separation and individuation, you know, who's making the most money, who's, you know, all the hyper competitive stuff. The group that I settled in with professionally, it's now called the International Center for Growth and Connection, and it believes in a model called relational cultural theory, and it simply says that we basically are born, you know, kind of, we're born dependent, and we move towards interdependence, mature interdependence. And it's all about the ways that we feel one another, right? And of course, the science that has come out over time completely supports that, you know, that in fact, we are connected through things like mirror neurons. In our physiology, we are connected, you know? And so I can now kind of look back and think, I don't know what was going on with you and I in that picture, but I was getting something from him. And when we met, it was profound for me. It was sort of this feeling of, oh my God, there's Isaac Knapper. And oh my God, of course, there's Isaac Knapper. And hearing his stories, you know, having the moments when we first met in Lori, one of the stories that I always share, and it's actually in the book, one of the stories that I share is when we were in Lori White's chambers, and here's Nancy, my sister, and I, white girls from Maine, and Lori White's was kind of sitting here, and then Isaac and his wife Denise were across, and he's literally sharing these stories of his beating, all of this stuff. We had no idea. I wanted to meet him. I didn't know what the meeting would be like. And then he starts sharing his experience, right? And I think both of us couldn't help but if you're present in that moment, be moved to tears about what had happened to the 16-year-old boy, right? You were yanked out of his house in the middle of the night and beaten to an inch of his life to try to force a confession about the murder of my father, right? You can't pull yourself away from that, for God's sakes, if you're a human being. And as we were sitting there, Denise at one point kind of turned to us and sort of said something about, what was it like for you when, this one happened? It must have been so hard. And, Nancy and I were kind of hemming and hawing, and, because neither one of us really has spent a lot of time talking about it, right? And, and I think I said something like, or Nancy did, about being 8 years old. And Isaac just stepped right in and he was like, I remember when I was in prison in Angola. So here he is, this 16-year-old boy who had been beaten and tried to force a confession. He's in Angola thinking about my little sister, remembering that Dr. Banks had an 8-year-old child and he wanted to know what he could do to help her. He's in prison, wrongfully convicted in Angola, the worst prison in America. And he's thinking about my 8-year-old sister. And so I look at Nancy and she's like, holding her nose. And, we were all just, ready to explode with feeling at the decency, right? And the humanity of what was just laid out seamlessly in front of us, right? I mean, there was no mistake. I get chills now, even trying to describe it. And so we're sitting there, and Nancy's just sobbing and everybody else starts sobbing. And Isaac, again, without missing a beat, this man who has been brutalized as a boy just looks at Nancy and says, can I give you a hug? Right? And again, this is the guy, in my mind, this is the guy that was horrible. He was on the street. We were trying to get him for a long time. And here's this insanely decent, kind human being that just wants to offer some comfort. I mean, I think that to me was the transformative moment of healing for me in this entire thing. It's only grown because, of course, I've heard more. He's heard stories about us. We've shared stories. I mean, it was a living embodiment of all that I had been talking about for years, that I had been writing about for years. And here it was, right in front of me. And I just will never forget it. Never.
So there's a portion in the book where you guys try to get some closure, and not you get this healing conversation with each other, but you try to get further answers about what really happened from the DA, and he maintains that they prosecuted the right guy. Yep. But there's also a conversation that Isaac operates in a way that he doesn't really feel any recrimination for him. He doesn't feel that anger. He feels anger at the beginning, but near the end of this journey, he's not really angry at the prosecutor. Is there anything you guys have to say, like, on that part of this, even as you guys have written the book together and you talked about these? If you could have, if you want your book to do some to have an impact on people who play roles in the system, what's the best outcome with the book? Or what's the best outcome, even with the players in this specific case? Yeah.
I'm clear, but I don't know. Do you want to answer, or do you want me to jump in?
I want to say this. With the prosecutors being the way they are in their job, is to prosecute. And nobody likes to lose. You know, if he feel like he was defeated, he's not going to admit to it being wrong. You know, nobody likes it for some reason. Some people would admit to it, but I learned that professionals like these prosecutors are and some judges, when they lose a case, they take it personal and they hold it in. Yes, I'm a forgivable person, but I learned that Patterson, Dillman, they not no forgiving people. They still stuck in the same the atmosphere that they were stuck in back then. They still feel that way. They grew in that, you know, and so they're not gonna ever probably admit to, well, you know what, it's possible that that guy could have been innocent. You know, I even asked for an apology when I was released from prison. And you know what Patterson told me? He said, you got your freedom, what else you want?
Yeah.
You know, and that was the response that I got. So it shows the mentality that they still have, and it never changed, you know.
Yeah. And what would I like for the prosecution? You know, I actually have thought a fair amount about this. In the book, you know, this, as the story goes, we had just left literally earlier this meeting. You know, we had the meeting with Lori on one day, Lori and Denise and Isaac, and then actually Isaac and Denise and Nancy and I had spent the morning, you know, printing and collating papers and transcripts and all this kind of stuff. And then we had this like whiplash where Nancy and I were meeting with Dave Pattison. He had, you know, and I'm grateful for him that he, you know, was willing to meet with us. He did not know that we had just met with Isaac, and I wanted it to be that way. I actually wanted to sort of see what he was going to say. And right off the bat, he started our conversation with, I'm sure I got the right guy. You know, and as proof of that, he said something to the effect of, you know, in fact, the minute he got released, when he was exonerated, he immediately started, you know, running drugs and went right back to jail, and said to us, you know, I think he's still there. You know, and so we didn't say, oh no, actually he's, you know, he's just down the street, you know, because we were just spent the morning with him. What I want him to know is, what I want him to do is, please just look at yourself, right? The work you do is hard. It's hard work, just as Isaac's saying. I'm not saying this is easy. I don't want to get Pollyanna about it, right? But where you have a case like this, that to me was just so grossly negligent. And I have to say, if people don't know, and you certainly can find out in the book, but the evidence that was withheld was that 1 week after my father's murder, 1 block from where he was murdered, 2 or 3, I can't remember, I think maybe it was 3 young men that fit the description of the men that killed my father, including one that had a white sailor cap. That's pretty specific. And only that, they had the murder weapon, the gun that killed my father, with 1 bullet missing, which ballistic tests showed was the bullet that killed my father. I mean, we're not talking about a little bit of circumstantial evidence. We're talking about a smoking gun, right? How in the world, if you can't consider that to be exculpatory evidence, or, you know, or you've got some storyline about a whole population of, you know, young Black men, please, would you rethink that? Because, you know, again, he felt like he was doing right by my family, maybe by society at large. And in the long run, he hurt us as badly as whoever did murder my father. And I take that seriously, right? That the fact that there was a wrongful conviction and that he still to this day doesn't admit it just sticks in me, you know. I want to say, you know, open up, you know, you got to think about this. And I'm not saying it's easy. I don't know, you know, but if you can't take that evidence and say, geez, I made a mistake, then, you know, I'm not sure I'm not sure you should be doing what you're doing.
You know, I want to clarify one thing. What I said earlier, I said that he lost. And I just want to clarify it and said, it's not about winning or losing. it's about right and wrong.
Right.
And that's what happened. They was wrong.
Right.
And they refused to admit to being wrong. You know, and it's just, it's terrible. And like I said, I have nothing against Patterson, Dillman. You know, I don't have anything against them because I wasn't brought up that way. My mother didn't raise me like that. You know, you have to forgive people, learn to forgive people. And that's part of the daily prayer. So I'm a forgiving person. But it's not about winning or losing. It's about right and wrong. And they was wrong. And I just hope one day that they would admit to it, say, well, you know what, we was wrong. And I hope Patterson and Dillman, I hope they're watching this video.
Before we have a kind of quarter of an hour left, I want to ask you two final questions. The first is, as part of promoting the book, as again, to the audience, the book launches officially tomorrow, to read a passage or a part of the book that you want people to take with them, or you would hope they take with them. And then after that part, to go straight into kind of what does the future look like for both of you? What's forthcoming for both of you once you've done that? And then we'll open the floor to questions or comments.
So I think I'm gonna read the ending of the book, which to me kind of sets the stage for kind of where to next. And for people, just to put it in some context, part of that incredible weekend that we spent together back in 2015 ended, if you can imagine, with Nancy and I, Denise, Isaac, Lori White, some other folks actually going to Angola, to the very prison that, you know, Isaac was sentenced to and spent 13 years of his life. And as you can imagine, I mean, that was, you know, I say this all the time, this whole thing has been surreal. That was one of the more surreal parts of the surreal, you know, the surrealist, if you will. And, you know, we were coming, Denise and Isaac drove Nancy and I, we were going directly from Angola to the airport. And this was some reflections along the way in terms of thinking about how to move on from here. So when the tour ended, Denise and Isaac offered to drive Nancy and me to the airport for our flight back to New York. During the 2-hour trip, we talked nonstop with Isaac, sharing one story after another. Every one of his ended with a friend or family member dead. His stories weren't designed to elicit sympathy or concern from us. He was simply sharing the facts of his life. As I listened, it dawned on me that it was nothing short of a miracle that he was still alive. And I was filled with gratitude that I had been able to meet him in person. I didn't yet know how my life would change or how I might grow from this experience, but I was aware of how seminal it felt and what a gift it already was. Isaac finally pulled his Lexus up to the curb outside the airport, then helped us carry our bags into the terminal. I was surprised by the emotions I felt, by the connection to this man who had been in my life for some 36 years. It seemed impossible to let go, to move forward with no clear plan for how to maintain the connection. Unsure of what the impact had been on him, but knowing clearly that this had changed me, that it had healed me at the very center of my being. We hugged once, twice, 3 times. And when we finally parted, I could see in his eyes that he too was having a hard time saying goodbye. As a parting gift, he said simply, "It feels like I'm saying goodbye to family." And at that moment, I knew that we would be okay, that we wouldn't lose each other, because we had both lost so much already in ways over which we had no control. Family is such a simple word that describes a built-in sense of belonging. Some families you're born into, others you choose, and still others, in rare cases, you're thrust into. Our lives, so disparate in every way, blew up together on April 12th, 1979, and in many ways, we've all been spinning out of control, fighting to steady ourselves against the power of that explosion. And finally, through the years, through the pain, through the losses, as our lives whirled by each other's, we reached out a hand, touched each other, and simply held on.
I think that's a fantastic way to end this part. But I want to ask both of you, what's coming up for you? What's the future looking like for you? Both you, we'll start with Isaac and go to Dr. Banks.
Well, our friendship is forever. Like I said at the airport, felt like saying bye to family. And that's what Amy, we are family now, and we are connected. We'll always be connected. And we have other things that we have planning. My wife, she loves New York. Amy just invited us to, Nancy just invited us to a trip in New York. And so we'll probably be going to New York next and February. And after that, I mean, it's just sky's the limit. We'll be traveling with the book and telling our story and just praying, hoping and praying that people would hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, immediately what's next is tomorrow we have a talk at law school, right? We're doing that in the morning. We have a book party launch, which is right here in New Orleans. We've got a book signing. We actually have a talk, another virtual talk in a couple of weeks through the International Center for Growth and Connection. And I think basically, and we have, a host of other things that are kind of in the works right now. We've already started to get other invitations, and it's my hope that people start really resonating with the story, being interested in the story, and again, not for us particularly, but because it's a story and it's a conversation that needs to happen. And so we're interested in going anywhere where that conversation can start, planting seeds and get communities going. I have a dream, and we've talked about it a little bit, and actually with my sister Nancy, of actually trying to pair this up with some curriculum, some racism curriculum, to really use the story to help people not just hear it kind of in a voyeuristic, distanced way, but I want people to get into the story. What would you have done? Young kids. I want to be going to high schools. I want to be going to colleges and really be talking to people about, what would you have done in this situation? And really, I'm hopeful that young people can help us navigate what needs to be done. We're getting old, and people need to help change this.
Yes, not to cut you off, but I think with people watching and seeing this here, they're looking at two people from two different parts of the world and different cultures, and they seeing how we can come together. And like I mentioned about the systemic racism, they have people would love to probably do this, but they just don't have a guide. And with them seeing this, they watching me, watching Amy and I, and they saying, wow, I can do the same thing. Yeah. Because this happened to me and this happened to this guy. I can try and get in touch with these people and maybe bring something together. And that's how it starts. It's like a trend. When people see, because it's so many people that different race people that have been in different things and had accidents concerning crime, and would probably love to come together with one another. But seeing this here, how it happened, even though I'm an innocent man, Amy an innocent, we two innocent people, but we still came together, and we together right now. And so I think this opened doors for a lot of people, a lot of white people, Black people, Native Americans, Mexicans, whatever. It gives them an opportunity and a chance, because most time people want to see something like this here before they make a move. And it just makes things better in the world.
Yeah. Well said.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You both mentioned that you want to pull young people in. Isaac, you currently work with young people as a trainer. But I hear that you have a new position coming up. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? And in that position, will you still be able to counsel and work with young kids and young adults?
Yes. In fact, I went to pick Amy and Nancy up at the airport, and I was soaking wet from sweat because I had to rush from the Mayweather fitness gym. I'll be the head instructor, the head trainer, and my job is to make sure other trainers fit the criteria to earn the position on the job as being a trainer. So she gives me this head position as the head trainer and the head instructor. So I'm obligated to that, to work with people over there and to help them train like Mayweather, Floyd Mayweather, the world champion. And I love it. It's my life. And so I'll still be working with the young kids and working at the Floyd Mayweather's fitness gym.
Yeah, and can I say this too? I mean, it's about boxing, but one of the things that I have really appreciated in sort of getting to know you more deeply over time is how important the discipline of boxing and the mind of boxing allowed Isaac to deal with what was thrown at him in his life. You know what I mean? And so it's sort of like you talk about boxing. The boxing's fascinating. I mean, I'm a sports junkie, so I love, hearing about every punch. But what is also cool is it's teaching kids about how you deal with life.
You're right. Exactly.
Is that you don't always win. Somebody's going to give you a cheap shot. Somebody's, and I think, if I think about who I want as a role model for my kids, here, right? Yeah. This is what I want. What he brings to life, what he,
Yeah, and what Amy said, as far as the sport of boxing, we teach discipline. We get involved with these kids. It's not just about boxing. It's about teaching them life, and I mean, if we can save one kid, it means the world to us, and that's what we do. We get these kids and get involved in their life academically as well. We make sure that they getting good grades in school, and the parents love us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that I'll probably forever be involved in.
I often tell my students to make the analogy when they're hearing something, my law students, is to make the analogy for how that works in your situation. And so for the audience, I'd like you all to think about, as you hear about different ways that they're keeping, or that Amy and Isaac hope that this book reach people, or they hope that their work keeps people out of the carceral system, is to make the analogy between what you're passionate about and what you're doing to help shrink our system. Even in whatever role you play in it. And we're right up on the end of the program. So before we close out, there's someone with their hand up, and I've asked if they'd like to ask a question, but I don't see it. But if Judge Lori wants to come back on the screen, if any of you have any last thoughts, this is the time to share them for all of you and our surprise guest, Judge White.
Yeah. One of the things I'd like to say is when I put these two together, what a scary thing was I was not thinking clearly. And again, I was just sitting here, damn, I made a good decision to put you two together, because this just could have been so drastically awful. And what a beautiful story of resilience that both of you are trauma victims that have told a story of beautiful resilience. And I just appreciate it so much. And I'm just so glad to have brought you two together.
And I want to thank you, Laura, for bringing us together, because when you made that call to call me and ask me would I like to meet.
And you said, what does she want? And I said, I don't know. Beat the hell out of me. Let's go meet her and see. She had to write a book, Isaac.
But, and you said, you don't have to answer it right now.
You can think about it.
Yeah, think about it and just call me. Don't be in no rush,
Yeah.
And of course, Isaac was like, well, do you think she's going to be mad at me? And I said, she better not be.
Right, right. But you know, I mean, yeah, it was a risky thing, right? I mean,
It was totally stupid. If I had a thought about it, I would never have let y'all meet. But I've done a lot of stupid things that work out. That's why we should all
Yeah.
do that.
That's right.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Well,
Thank you, SMU. We really appreciate it.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, what can top that, right? Yeah. I'm gratefully for you as well, Laura. You have been an ally to the relationship and, you know, every step of the way in the way that only you
Y'all
could.
stop it. I can't stand this love fest.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll cut you back down to size in a minute.
All right, good.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all for ending on that levity. There's a, want to thank you all for being so open with the story about opening or basically closing some of the wounds that writing the story may have opened. I'm so happy that you joined us for this. I'm so excited for the future success of the book and the book tour and the documentary. I hope it reaches the ears of those who most need to hear it. And this is another example of how we use stories or use these compelling stories to make the case for criminal justice reform. So thank you for joining us in our Doing the Work series. Thank you for joining us this evening and for spending the time with us. And thank you all for attending.